What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another Retro Yu-Gi-Oh video. And in this video, we're moving on from GOAT format and moving into what comes next. Now, that may be surprising to hear, especially given that on screen right now, we have the forbidden list for GOAT format. There's no changes here. It is just the list that I covered in my last video covering the last cards of the GOAT card pool. And if you're familiar with GOAT format, you should be well aware of this list because it is the same list that GOAT uses, the April 2005 TCG list. However, we're going to be moving into Cyber format, and Cyber format actually uses the same ban list as GOAT. It just has some differences in terms of card pool. Now, mostly when I'm covering this era of the game, I think I am going to stick to just like one format per ban list. But since this format is played and it does share a ban list, I'm just going to cover it anyways. Basically, if I encounter a format that's already played that breaks this rule, I'm just going to cover it. So that's what we're doing with Cyber format. And we will be having a tournament this month in this format in the YGO from Zero Discord server. So definitely head on over there if you want to play in this format. But if the limited list is the same, then it begs the question, what really changes in this format, and does anything really change too much from GOAT format? And the answer to that question is yes, because some of the cards that were released in this set really do change the way the game is played, some argue forever. Of course, before we get into the cards that really do change up the game quite a bit, I want to cover the other promos that are released in this format. And some people might even say that one of the cards on this list is also a card that sort of shakes up the game, but it doesn't really have the lasting impact that the other cards I'm going to talk about later do. But let's dive into these promo cards. These were not released in Cybernetic Revolution, which is the new core set that the format adds. These were released in a variety of different ways. So Des Voltscaff is a Shonen Jump card, I believe. And this is if this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, inflict 500 damage to your opponent each time a normal or quick play spell card resolves. This card gains 200 attack until the end of its turn. And it has 2200 attack to start with, level 6 monster. So it can beef itself up quite a bit and then attack over your opponent's stuff, deal 500 damage on top of that. So on the surface, this card might seem like an okay card. Realistically, it's not really that good because in order to actually give it more than 2200 attack, which, Goblin Attack Force is 2300 attack, so that's like the standard that you're comparing to for a monster. If you have to tribute it, then it costs more than a Goblin Attack Force, so is it really worth playing this over that? He does deal a little bit of burn, but only 500, so that's not really that much. And to actually get it up over 2200 attack, you need to play quick play spells, you need to play normal spells, and that requires more resources. So, this is kind of a very lossy card. And while it can be pretty neat to bring out and then buff up, realistically, that's not going to last you that much. So I don't really think this card is that good. It is very interesting, though, and I could definitely see people trying to build around it. However, it just takes too much to actually get to a point where it's worth playing. Next up, for Nightmare Troubadour, which was a video game, it released some promos as well. And we've got the Silent Magicians. Now, these are level monsters, so we got Silent Magician level 4 and Silent Magician level 8. And just like the other level monsters, one can level up into the other. Silent Magician level 4 is a level 4 spellcaster, 1000 attack, 1000 defense. Each time your opponent draws a card or cards, place one spell counter on this card, maximum of 5. This card gains 500 attack for each spell counter on it. During the standby phase of your next turn, after the 5th spell counter is placed on this card, you can send this face-up card with 5 spell counters onto the graveyard, special summon 1 Silent Magician level 8 from your hand or deck. Now that's a pretty good base effect, especially considering some of the other level monsters that we've seen so far in exploring these formats. That card can get itself buffed up pretty quickly. It just takes 2 draws and 2000 attack. So if you can stall for 1 turn basically and keep this thing on field, then it is a quite formidable level 4 monster. And at max, it can go up to 3500 attack, which is kind of wild. Now, at that point, you're generally going for your Silent Magician level 8, which is a 3500 attack point monster on its own. That can't be normal summoned or set and must be special summoned by Silent Magician level 4 and cannot be special summoned in other ways. And it's unaffected by your opponent's spell effects. So very cool stuff, and is a bit better than having this thing at just 5 counters. But I really do think that this is a very interesting card, and there are ways to manipulate spell counters in this format. You got Pitch Black Power Stone, you got Prince Magician, you got a variety of ways to get counters on this thing. So I really do think this is a very neat sort of build around archetype almost, and I'm curious to see if people will, experiment with it in Cyber format, because I do think that there is something you can make out of this. Now, if you want a way to get outside Magician level 4 more easily, you've also got Magician Circle. Magician Circle is a trap that says when a spellcaster monster declares an attack, each player spell summons one spellcaster monster with 2,000 or less attack from their deck in attack position. And realistically, if you're playing a standard sort of deck, they might not be playing spellcasters, so this could potentially be just a one-sided benefit for you. Now, people could be playing things like Gravekeeper Spy, for instance, but if they do summon that out, that's 1,200 in attack. So very easy to get over with your monsters here. And if you're playing things like Dark Magician Girl or something like that, where it sort of maxed out the 2,000 attack stat, Magical Marionette's probably a little bit better than Dark Magician Girl, but you do you. Then this thing can actually bring out a very powerful monster from your deck. So it's very, very neat, and it sort of gives spellcaster decks a little bit more tools they were lacking before this. But of course, the most significant promo card from this era was Xarian Universe, which was released in the Collector Tins. Now, there were other cards released in the Collector Tins, which I'll get to in a second, but Xarian Universe has its own fair share of controversy surrounding it, because people have sort of gone back and forth about whether to include this in GOAT format. Now, in modern GOAT format, that's like years and years removed from the argument that Xarian should be included, but basically there was this idea that like Xarian was a promo that was around like when GOAT format was being played, before Cyber Dragon and all the stuff from Cybernetic Revolution came out, and so it should be included. But a variety of people argued that, that wasn't necessarily a good idea, because this card is very, very powerful, and it trivializes a lot of these sort of other cards in the format. For instance, Scapegoat, this card inflicts piercing battle damage, so you can get in and deal 1,400 damage with that. But you don't necessarily have to, because you can just keep this at 1,800 attack, and that gets over a lot of other things in the metagame. Also, if you want to play defensively, you can set this card 1900 defense, walls up most attacking pressure in this format. So it can serve as offense, can serve as defense, and it can also deal with scapegoats. So, there's a bunch of debate surrounding this card, and because it was very good in GOAT format, if you would include it in GOAT format, but eventually people decided not to include it. And so now it's around in Cyber format, and it can be very good in Cyber format, but Cyber format, I think, is a bit more faster paced, so I'm not sure if this card will actually see much play in the format, but it is kind of interesting as sort of a historical relic of the time, and, the subject of much controversy at that time. But moving on from this very powerful card, we get a bunch of other tin promos that are mainly here just for anime stuff. We've got Guilford the Lightning first. This is a level 8 monster, 2800 attack, 1400 defense. It says you contribute 3 monsters to tribute summon, but not set this card. If summoned this way, destroy all monsters your opponent controls. So if you are able to get out this thing, attributing 3 monsters, then that's very good. You wipe out your opponent's entire monster lineup, and then you get in for 2800. But if we look at the exact cards that we're using to get this thing out, then you're spending 3 resources to bring out this one card, and you're wiping away your opponent's stuff. But your opponent likely won't have 3 monsters on their side of the field. If they do, then this can be very good. But if they do, then also why have they not been able to get rid of some of your monsters, right? Or you not been able to get rid of some of their monsters before going for the Guilford play? So realistically, I don't think that effect will really be the most valuable thing in the world. It can deal with a bunch of sets. If you're playing against like a Pac-Man strategy or something, I guess that can work. But I don't really think this card is the best. It's a lot of investment for something that realistically won't really pay off that much. But I do think it's a very, very cool card. And Joey did use this in the anime. Speaking of cards that Joey used in the anime, these tins were very good for that, because we also got Panther Warrior, level 4 Beast Warrior, 2,000 attack, 1,600 defense. Says this card cannot declare an attack unless you tribute 1 monster. So this is potentially good. Side deck tech against burn, contribute Geometry tokens and get in for that. So that's kind of nice, but realistically that cost is going to prevent this card from seeing play. Next up, we got Rocket Warrior, another Joey classic, level 4 warrior, 1,500 attack, 1,300 defense. So during your battle phase, this card cannot be destroyed by battle. Also, you take no damages from battles involving this card. If this card attacked a monster after damage calculation, that attack target loses 500 attack until the end of the turn. So kind of neat. You can attack into an opponent's monster, sink it down by 500, and then get over that with one of your other monsters. But realistically, like, that combo won't come up too often, and so this card isn't really the best. But it is very interesting. Really neat card design. Unfortunately, it's not the best in this format. Next up, we've got Vorse Raider. This was a Kaiba card. It's just a level 4 1900 attack, 1200 defense monster. Realistically, this is outclassed by things like Archfiend Soldier, which is a level 4 1900 attack, 1500 defense dark monster. So realistically, you just play Archfiend Soldier if you are playing a monster like this. But if you're playing a Beast Warrior deck, then this could come up. Like if you're playing things like a Ranged Battle Ox, Wild Nature's Release, things like that, then maybe you do want to play Vorse Raider as another just big beater for that deck. But realistically, this won't really come up that often. Of course, while these promos are interesting, they're not really what makes this format so different from GOAT. So let's dive into Cybernetic Revolution, the new core set, and see what really changes the format around. Cybernetic Revolution is rightly remembered as one of the most impactful sets in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, even though looking at the cards, you might not really see many power players. But, the reason why it's considered so powerful is because of the card we've currently got on screen, Cyber Dragon. Now, Cyber Dragon was a card from the anime, and it was a card that lived up to the anime hype. It was a level 5 machine monster, 2100 attack, 1600 defense. If your opponent controls a monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. That may seem like a very, very simple effect, and to be fair, it is a very simple effect. However, being able to just special summon out a 2100 attack beater from your hand for free is really powerful. It accelerates the pace of play a lot, gets over things like Gravekeeper Spy, which are staples in GOAT format, and it's just very, very key to increasing the pace of the game, getting things more aggressive, and going in for more damage more quickly. So the grind game that people love of GOAT is a bit abbreviated in this format due to things like Cyber Dragon. Now, of course, there is also some other factors that contribute to the games being a lot shorter in Cyber format than GOAT format. And those main factors come from Cyber End Dragon and Cyber Twin Dragon. Now, these are two fusion monsters based around Cyber Dragon. Cyber Dragon archetype doesn't really have anything else besides Cyber Dragon in it right now. I honestly do think that's one of the coolest things about this archetype as the game continues, where it's just variations on this one monster. And it's just very, very neat. And you get that a little bit more later in the GX era and then a lot later in the game as well. So I'm really a fan of that sort of flavor. Very different from the elemental heroes, which are sort of all these different monsters that combine into big things, whereas this is just the same monster combining into big things. And the things it combines into this set is very powerful. Cyber Twin Dragon is a level 8, 2800 attack point fusion monster made up of just 2 Cyber Dragons. And so the fusion summon of this card can only be done with the above fusion materials. This card can make it its second attack during each battle phase. And Cyber End Dragon is a fusion monster made up of 3 Cyber Dragons, so the fusion summon of this card can only be done with the above fusion materials. If this card attacks a defensive monster, inflicts piercing battle damage. 4,000 attack is nothing to cough at there, and if it's attacking into something like a Scapegoat token, then that's 4,000 damage to your opponent. So in this format, there's a lot of things that aren't necessarily as viable. Scapegoat is potentially one of them. But you might be wondering how consistent these monsters are to bring out, because they are fusion monsters, and fusion hasn't necessarily been the most consistent strategy in the world. Well, the answer is they're actually very, very consistent to bring out, because you use something like Cyberstein. Cyberstein is a level 2 monster, 700 attack, 500 defense, and you pay 5,000 life points to bring out a fusion monster from your extra deck. And it doesn't necessarily count as a fusion summon, which means that the restriction on these cards can sort of be bypassed, because it only says a fusion summon of this card must be done with the above fusion materials. It doesn't say that it can't be summoned outside of a fusion summon. So you can bring these out with Cyberstein and get in for a ton of damage. If you're able to clear the way, potentially tributing out like a Monarch, that's 2,400 attack, and if you've got Last Will to bring out the Stein, then you can bring out the Cyber Twin Dragon, and that's 5,600 attack plus 2,400 attack, which does add up to exactly 8,000. So, you're not always going to get that ideal situation. Oftentimes, your opponent will have disruption for you. But the existence of these cards and the existence of that combo makes this format a lot more fast-paced. And Steinarch decks or Steingate decks or just decks based around bringing out Stein and bringing out one of these fusion monsters are very, very powerful. And they are very good to know about in this format. And they are, in my opinion, the main shift from GOAT format. Cyber Dragon accelerating the pace of play is all well and good, but also, just having those big combos and having Stein actually have a way to end the game on the spot in a lot of different cases is very, very strong and definitely changes the game quite a bit. But of course, you don't have to use Cyberstein to bring out those fusion monsters. You can also use something like Power Bond. Power Bond is a normal spell that says fusion summon 1 machine fusion monster from your extra deck using monster from your hand or field of fusion material, and it gains attack equal to its original attack. During the end phase of this turn, this card is activated. You take damage equal to the amount of attack gained from this effect at the time of summon. So what you can do is, if you've got a bunch of Cyber Dragons, you can Power Bond them into either of these monsters, and that is very, very strong. Cyber Twin Dragon with 5,600 attack can deal potentially 11,200 damage, which is nuts. And Cyber End Dragon can deal 8,000 damage attacking into a Scapegoat token. So Power Bond can be another very powerful way to close out the game. However, of course, because you need multiple Cyber Dragons to do it, It's a bit less consistent than the Stein play, but it's still a very interesting card here, and definitely something that I expect people to be playing around with in this format. Now, if you are afraid of the machine threat posed by Cyber Dragon's fusions, there is System Down. System Down is a normal spell that says pay 1,000 life points, banish all machine-type monsters your opponent controls and in their graveyard. So if your opponent does have Cyber Dragon or one of the Cyber Dragon fusions on their side of the field, you can System Down, banish that away. However, the issue with this is that if your opponent is going for a big Cyberstein play or something to bring out these Cyber Dragon fusions, then you probably won't have time to actually get to your turn and play System Down. You're probably just dead that turn. So this card is a bit hit or miss. If you are playing a devoted machine deck, maybe it's playing just more than just the Steinarch package. Maybe it's playing a bunch of machines, then you can go for System Down. But I think in general, this isn't really the best side deck card for this format. Now, Cyber Dragon wasn't the only cyber card in this set. Because of the Cybernetic Revolution, it seems like they felt like they had to make more cyber cards as well. Weirdly, though, none of these other cyber cards are machines, and they all sort of go around a strategy that's very different from what Cyber Dragon's trying to do. Firstly, we got Cyber Archfiend. This is a Fiend monster, 1,000 attack, 2,000 defense. Says at the beginning of your draw phase, if you have no cards in your hand, draw one more card in addition to your normal draw. During your end phase, if you have one or more card in your hand, destroy this card. So this is sort of playing with a strategy of like having very low cards and using up all your resources every turn. And the other cyber monsters that are not Cyber Dragon play around with this as well. Cybernetic Cyclopean is a level 4 Beast Warrior, 1400 attack, 200 defense. Says while you have no cards in your hand, this card gains 1,000 attack. And Cybernetic Magician is a card level 6 spellcaster, 2400 attack, 1000 defense. Says you can discard one card to target one face-up monster on the field. That target's attack becomes 2000 until the end phase. So all these monsters have sort of ways to play around with if you've got an empty hand or not. Cybernetic Magician doesn't really do that as much as like Cybernetic Cyclopean or Cyber Archfiend, but the point of Cybernetic Magician is you can discard as many cards as you want to do its effect. And if you're buffing up the Cyber Archfiend in 2000 attack, that's also pretty good. You can also use it to decrease your opponent's monster down to 2000 and get over it with the Cybernetic Magician itself. So these cards sort of form an interesting core of monsters that just play around with trying to have your hand emptied. And there are some other cards in this set that play around with this as well. Rising Energy is another trap that discards a card here. So discard one card, then target one face-up monster on the field. That target gains 1500 attack until the end of this turn. So this is another way to empty your hand out a little bit. You can do for big swings with Cybernetic Cyclopean, where you discard the last card in your hand to buff this up by 15, and then it gains another 1000, so that's buffing this up to 3900. So very interesting stuff with Rising Energy, although realistically this strategy is not really the best. They also do have Mechanical Hound, which is not a cyber monster, but is a machine monster, which is just very confusing to me. I feel like they had the perfect option to name it Cyber and make it a machine, but I don't know why they didn't. But anyways, it's a level 7, 2800 attack, 1500 defense point monster. It says, while you have no card in your hand, your opponent cannot activate spell cards. And that is a very, very powerful effect. This is sort of the best payoff to this sort of strategy, in my opinion, because 2800 attack is hard to get over, especially if you don't have access to spells. So I think that this is a very neat sort of strategy, but if you're building it, you probably want to build around Mechanical Hound as opposed to things like Cyber Archfiend or Cybernetic Cyclopean. Now, if we're on the topic of other machines, there were also another set of machines released in this set that also tie into the anime, and that is the Roid monsters, played by Cyrus in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. These Roids are just all different machines, and that's basically their main defining feature. They don't really do a common thing at this point in the game. They just sort of all do different things. So Drillroid is the best of the Roids, is a level 4 machine, 1600 attack, 1600 defense. Says before damage calculation, this card attacks defense for a monster, destroy that monster. So this can sort of fulfill the role of a Mystic Swordsman level 2 or Sasuke Samurai, etc. But it can work on set monsters and face-up attack position monsters. So very powerful stuff here. And definitely a card that you should consider even if you're not playing a Roid deck. Next up is Gyroid. Gyroid is a level 3 machine, 1000 attack, 1000 defense. So the first time this card would be destroyed by battle each turn, it is not destroyed. So this card can wall up for a bit. Maybe you want to tribute it off for something else. So could potentially see play in like Steinarch decks, although Spirit Reaper is probably the better card if you're going for a monster that's not destroyed by battle. Next up, we got Streamroid. This is a level 4 machine, 1800 attack, 1800 defense. So if this card attacks an opponent's monster, this card gains 500 attack. During the damage step only, if this card is attacked by an opponent's monster, this card loses 500 attack during the damage step only. So this is very similar to a Goblin Attack Force, where you're getting in for 2300. But also, it is very vulnerable on the crackback. Your opponent can summon out a monster and hit over this pretty easily, even if it doesn't have 1800 attack. So, I sort of conceptualize it as the machine's version of Goblin Attack Force. And whether it's good or not, it's up to you. It has seen some play in this format in the past. but realistically, it's not the best in my opinion. Now, Steamroid and Gyroid both combine together to form Steam Gyroid. This is a level 6 machine fusion, 2200 attack, 1600 defense, made with Gyroid and Steamroid. That's all it really is. You can power bond this thing out to be a 4400 attack point monster if you really want to, but realistically, it's not the best card in the world. Speaking of other fusions, we've also got UFO Roid, which forms a fusion with any warrior into UFO Roid Fire, which we'll get to in a second. But UFO Roid is interesting because this is sort of a recruiter on a tribute monster. It's level 6, you have to tribute it out. And it's 1200 attack, 1200 defense. It says when this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you're supposed to summon one machine type monster with 1500 or less attack from your deck in face up attack position. So it's just a recruiter. Can bring out another one of these, I guess. It can also bring out like a Gyroid or one of your other Roid monsters, which we'll get to in a second. You can bring out a Cyberstein as well, I guess, too. But realistically, this card is not a very good recruiter. If you are going for a specific machine, you probably want to play the elemental recruiter that gets into that. But, you know, I don't know. This card isn't that good. Now, the reason you play it is if you're going for something like UFO Roid Fire. This is a fusion that has a lot of stars. I think it's level 10? Yeah, it looks like level 10 to me. And it's a machine fusion, question mark, attack, question mark, defense. Says fusion summon of this card can only be conducted with the above fusion materials. The original attack and defense of this card become equal to the combined original attack of the two fusion material monsters used for the fusion summon of this card. So if you use a machine with, well, you can't use any machine beside UFO Roid, but if you use a warrior with a high attack, something like Elemental Hero Tempest, which is listed on this card, although isn't legal in this format, so it's kind of interesting, a peek into the future. But if you use a powerful warrior, then you can potentially bring this out with a ton of attack. So very interesting. There are build arounds for this sort of strategy. It can be a bit tricky to pull off, but if you do pull it off, then you've got a really, really powerful monster that can be a bit difficult to get over. Going back to the other Roids that don't form fusions at this point, we've got Jetroid. This is a level 4 machine, 1200 attack, 1800 defense. So at the time this card is selected as an attack target by an opponent's monster, you can activate trap cards from your hand. So this is kind of an interesting way to sort of prevent your traps from being sniped by like MST or Heavy Storm or something, and potentially activating like Attack Red 2 Armor or Mirror Force from the hand when they attack the Jetroid. However, your opponent can just play around this by, attacking your other monsters first and then attacking Jetroid at the end. But, it's still very interesting. Cool to see them experimenting with this type of effect, even though it isn't really that good at this point. Next up, we got Patroid. There's a level 4 Earth machine monster, 1200 attack, 1200 defense. Says once per turn during your main phase, you can look at one face down monster or card, not just monster, your opponent controls, then return to its original position. So this can look at sets. It can look at, it looks at any set, but like it can look at set monsters. It can look at set spells or traps. So you're getting a little bit more information there. I don't really think that's that good, or at least not good enough to have on a level 4 1200 attack point monster. But I do think it's interesting. So you could play it if you really want to. And lastly, there's Psychroid. This is really just here because, it's a Roid. But realistically, this is a level 3 monster, 1800 attack, 1000 defense, doesn't really do anything. Now, eventually, we'll get a fusion monster based around it. But right now, this is just a normal monster. There isn't really any reason to play it in a Roid deck. Eventually, you will get cards that are more specific to Roids in general. But right now, these are just a loose collection of machine monsters that share a name. But since we're on the topic of other anime strategies, let's get to the protagonist of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX's strategies, Jade and Yuki. Now, before diving into the iconic elemental hero support that was released in this set, I want to talk about Wing Karibo level 10, because this was also a card from the anime. Jaden used Wing Karibo a lot, and during one iconic episode, he made Wing Karibo into level 10, using the card Transcendent Wings, which is a quick play spell that says send one face up or face down Wing Karibo you control and 2 cards from your hand to the graveyard. Spell summon one Wing Karibo level 10 from your hand or deck. And Wing Karibo level 10 is a very interesting boss monster here. It only has 300 attack and 200 defense, and it can't be normal summoned or set. It must be special summoned with Transcendent Wings. But during your opponent's battle phase, you contribute this face-up card and destroy as many attack monsters your opponent controls as possible, and if you do, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the combined original attack of those monsters. So you might wonder, what's the point in going into this? Well, the point is use Transcendent Wings during your opponent's battle phase, tribute a Wing Karibo, go into a Wing Karibo level 10, and then tribute this as basically a better Mirror Force. However, doing that costs you a lot of cards. It costs you the Wing Karibo that you use to tribute for Transcendent Wings. It costs you the Transcendent Wings itself. It costs you 2 other cards that you're sending for Transcendent Wings. So already that's 4 cards. Then you're tributing another card in the form of Wing Karibo level 10. So that's 5 cards to clear a number of monsters on your opponent's side of the field and deal damage to them. Now, that's not bad in terms of the effect, but the amount of cost going into it is pretty bad. So I don't really think this card is worth playing. It can make for some very funny blowout moments, but while you've done that, you've also gone really negative, and so it's not really the best here. But it is very interesting to see this card exist and it's cool to have as sort of like a blowout boss monster from the anime. Next up, diving into the elemental heroes that Jaden is so fond of, we get Elemental Hero Bubble Man. Now, in hindsight, this is one of the better elemental hero cards. It actually had an effect. Level 4 water monster, 800 attack, 1200 defense. Says if this card is the only card in your hand, you can summon it from your hand. When this card is summoned, you can draw 2 cards. You must control no other cards and have no cards in your hand to activate and resolve this effect. Now, the second part of the effect, not really coming up that often, right? You know, you basically have to top deck this card and then go for it. Now, there are some potential ways to do this. I actually didn't consider this, but I guess Pot of Generosity, which I had down at the bottom of this list, could potentially work with Elemental Hero Bubble Man, because you get to return 2 cards from your hand to the deck, then shuffle the deck. So if you don't like some of the cards in your hand, and you've got a Bubble Man, you can go for Pot of Generosity, shuffle 2 back, then special summon out Bubble Man, and draw 2 more. So it sort of like resets itself that way, but this is just a hard minus, and Pot of Generosity is one of the worst cards in the game's history for a reason. If you aren't going for this play, then it's just strictly negative. You are losing a ton of cards there. It could also set up for, like, if you draw the Cyberstein that you need in deck for your Lost Will plays, you can return that, I guess. But, you know, if you draw Cyberstein, you probably just want to summon out Cyberstein and go for that. So, realistically, this card's not very good, but it is kind of funny how it does synergize with Bulbman. I didn't even think of that until this point. So, you know, there are some weird synergies with this card, and it is a very interesting card to play around with. Now, of course, in the future, we'll have decks built around it, like Bubble Beat decks, when new summoning mechanics come out. They can really abuse Bubbleman's special summon effect, but still, it's not a bad card, and it probably is the best of the heroes released at this point, even though there are no fusions for it just yet. Next up, we got Bubble Shuffle. Speaking of Bubble Man, this is a specific Bubble Man support card. So target 1 face-up attack position elemental hero Bubble Man. You control 1 face-up attack position monster your opponent controls. Change both of those targets to defense position, then tribute that elemental hero Bubble Man, and summon 1 elemental hero from your hand. That's really bad. This is a terrible card. Just awful, awful card. But, you know, it is kind of interesting that releasing support just for Bubble Man. And I guess there are some things you can do with it where, you know, use it aggressively during your turn to switch the Bubble Man to defense and then summon out Spark Man. That's like the best elemental hero at this point. But that's really bad. Like, this card is not good at all. Eventually, there will be better elemental heroes to bring out off it, but, like, it's still a Bubble Man specific support card, so not really worth playing. Speaking of elemental hero specific support cards, we've got Spark Blaster. This is an equipped spell that only equips to elemental hero Spark Man. During your main phase, you can target 1 face-up monster, change the battle position of that target. After you use this effect 3 times to destroy this card. I do think it's kind of interesting that it has that sort of caveat. After you use this effect 3 times, destroy this card. I think more cards should have that in the game, and eventually you sort of see that design space explored with things like Xyz monsters and stuff like that. But I think it's cool to see them exploring with it right now. That being said, this card is really bad. You know, you can use it to switch an opponent's monster to defense and then get in with Sparkman, but realistically, it's not better than like a block attack because Sparkman is so weak that it's probably going to get run over very soon after. So this card is not very good. I do think it's interesting, but not really worth playing. Getting into the good elemental hero support in this set, we've got Skyscraper. Skyscraper is a field spell that says if an elemental hero monster attacks a monster that has a higher attack, the attacking monster gains 1,000 attack during damage calculation only. This can turn elemental heroes into a bit more of an aggressive deck. For instance, most of them can then get over a Cyber Dragon, except for like Avion and Clayman, but Clayman's probably being set anyways. I guess Bowman can't really get over much either. But anyway, you're using this with like Burstinatrix or with Sparkman to get over things. You can also use it with the elemental hero fusions like Wingman or Thunder Giant to get over really big things. So it's kind of interesting in that way. And I like this card. I think it's neat. It's not really the best in this format because elemental heroes aren't the best in this format, but as time goes on, I think it will have more and more applications and make for a very interesting deck. Now, the big elemental hero support that people are probably, you know, really thinking about for this format is Miracle Fusion. Now, Miracle Fusion is very interesting. It's a normal spell. It says fusion summon 1 elemental hero fusion monster from your extra deck by banishing fusion materials mentioned on it from your field or graveyard. Now, this card, of course, people know from later formats because it is very strong in those formats because you have stronger elemental hero fusions. In this format, there aren't as many good elemental hero fusions, but still, this is a very powerful fusion card. It allows you to take advantage of your elemental heroes that are in graveyard, which is really good because if you go for something like a regular poly, then you basically get to polymerization twice because you can then use this on the monster you use for that poly to go into another fusion monster. So very, very cool card. And this card is probably what makes elemental heroes worth playing over some other fusion decks. But realistically, the monster that you're going to are not good enough to really support this just yet. Next up, we got Rottweiler. This is a level 3 Earth Machine. 800 attack, 1200 defense. If this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, target one elemental hero card and one polymerization in your graveyard, add them to your hand. So this allows you to sort of reuse the poly stuff along with Fusion Recovery, which is a normal spell that basically does the same thing. So target one polymerization in your graveyard and one monster in your graveyard that was used as material for Fusion Summon, add them to your hand. So all three of these cards are sort of trying to get around the Fusion problem of going in for a ton of resources to make your fusion monster, but then losing those resources, right? These cards all try to mitigate that by adding back some of those resources. Of these, I think the Miracle Fusion is the best of them because it can just fusion summon another one right away, as opposed to something like Fusion Recovery or Rottweiler, which both need you to have another material as well. You do lose access to those monsters because they're banished at this point, but you could potentially go lean into that with something like Dimension Fusion or something like that. So I do like Miracle Fusion the best out of these three options. Miracle Fusion isn't the only fusion card in the set that banishes cards from grave. We've also got Dragon's Mirror. Dragon Mirror is a normal spell. It says fusion summon one dragon fusion monster from your extra deck by banishing fusion materials listed on it from your field or graveyard. So there are a lot of good dragons you can go into here. You can go into King Dragoon using Lord of D and Divine Dragon Ragnarok. You can also go into Black Skull Dragon, going into Red Eyes Black Dragon and Summon Skull. And so there are a bunch of things you can do with it. Of course, there's no 500 Dragon at this point. That is the card that most people know this card being used with. But, you know, this is still a very powerful card, and you could definitely build around certain decks with it. And I'm sort of curious to see what people do with this card in the future. Now, if you want a way to take advantage of those banished dragon monsters, then DDM, Different Dimension Master, could be the card for you. The level 5 light spellcaster, 1700 attack, 1500 defense. Says once per turn, you can discard one spell, then target one of your banished monsters, special summon that target. So you can potentially go for a big Dragon's Mirror, bring out the DDM, pitch a card, and then bring back like a Red Eyes or a Summon Skull. So that's kind of interesting there. Realistically, though, I think you'd probably be using this in a deck abusing Magician's Circle, maybe going into Dark Paladin, using Fusion Gate to summon that out, and then you use this to pitch a card, bring out like Buster Blader to get another big monster there. So I think that this is a very interesting deck. I'm curious to see what people will do with this. I think it's a card that it's definitely very powerful in the right hands, in the right deck. It just takes a bit to actually discover what that deck is. But when someone does break this card, I assume it will be very, very broken. Next up, we got Tyranno Infinity. This is a level 4 dinosaur. Question mark attack, 0 defense. So the original attack of this card becomes the number of your banished dinosaur monster times 1000. Now, there aren't really many good dinosaur monsters in the game at this point. There aren't really many good ways to banish them. So I don't really think that this card is that good at all at this point in the game. Now, there might be some things you can do with this later, but that'll be for later formats, not really this one. So in this format, this card is not really worth thinking about that much. Next up, we got DD Trap Hole. This is a normal trap that can actually banish your dinosaur monster potentially. It says when your opponent sets exactly one monster and no other cards, target that set monster and one monster you control, destroy those targets, and you do banish them. So this could be used on your own like dinosaurs to buff up Dinosaur Infinity here. But realistically, that's a bit slow. And realistically, you're not really going to get the most use out of this. You're still going minus on whatever monster you banish. And while you can get that back through other means, like, I don't really think it's that good. I mean, the one thing is maybe you, like, do it on a DMOC, and then you get the DMOC back, like Dim Fuse or something. So there's that. But, like, you have other ways to clear the DMOC. And, yeah, I think this card is just way, way too situational. Now, if you want another way to banish, lastly, in this set, we've got Dark Catapult, the level 4 Earth Machine monster, 1000 attack, 1500 defense. During your standby phase, if this card is in defense position, put one counter on this card. You can remove from play a number of cards in your graveyard equal to the number of counters on this card to destroy that many spell or trap cards on the field. Then remove all counters on this card. Very, very slow card. Really bad, I think. It doesn't really banish things too quickly. And, like, if your opponent knows about the effect, it will just play around it, right? Like, they don't need to play into this effect if it's got a ton of counters on it. So, realistically, this card is not very that good. But it is kind of interesting. I think Jaden did use it in the anime, so that's kind of cool as well. And it is trying to play a bit more around with counters. Now, if we're talking about another monster that plays around with counters in this set, we've also got BES Crystal Core. This is a level 5 machine monster. 2100 attack, 1000 defense. So this card cannot be destroyed by battle if this card attacks or is attacked. Remove one counter from this card at the end of the damage step. If you cannot destroy it, once per turn during your main phase, you can change one face-up attack position monster your opponent controls to face-up defense position. This is one of a variety of monsters that do this sort of thing. And of those, it's probably one of the worst of them because changing a monster's battle position is not really that good. And it only has 2100 attack, which is not really the best either. Like a Cyber Dragon has 2100 attack. It's much more easy to summon out. It can be destroyed by battle, I guess, so you can use this to like crash into the Cyber Dragon. But because you can do that, you don't even need the effect to switch a monster to defense. So Realistically, I don't really think this is that good. Now, it can be used to switch things like Goblin Attack Force or things like that to defense, but if you do that, you potentially play into Prepare to Strike Back, which is a continuous trap release in the set. So that each time your opponent declares a face-up attack defense position monster as an attack target, toss a coin and call it. If you call it right, change the targeted monster to attack position. If you call it wrong, the controller of this card takes damage equal to the amount that the attack. I mean, this just inflicts piercing damage. I'm not going to say the sort of like convoluted wording of this because it just inflicts piercing damage, basically. So this card is a continued trap that can pair with Goblin Attack Force, can pair with, other monsters like that, like Giant Orc, etc. And it's very interesting in regards with that. Now, I think the better card to play instead of this is just Final Attack Orders that basically outclasses this card, because what you can do is if your opponent monster declared an attack, you activate Final Attack Orders that puts your Goblin Attack Force or Giant Orc or whatever you're playing to attack position and does the same thing without the gambling aspect of it. But I do think it's kind of interesting, and this is sort of like a continued effect. Like Final Attack Orders is also a continued effect, but like you're forcing your opponent to gamble every time they attack into a monster. So that's kind of neat. Now, I think that it's just better to have that monster in attack rather than going for the gambling aspect of it, but it is kind of cool and a very unique card. And clearly they're trying to build up this sort of not even archetype, but this strategy of having big monsters that attack in and then switch to defense position, because there are even more monsters in this set that do that. First up, we've got Goblin Elite Attack Force, the level 4 Fiend monster, 2200 attack, 1500 defense. So if this card attacked, it's changed to defense position at the end of the battle phase, and its battle position cannot be changed until the end of your next turn. So it's basically like a worse Goblin Attack Force, but realistically, this card is like a better Giant Orc, because Giant Orc also has 2200 attack and 0 defense. This has 1500 defense. So realistically, this card can swap out for that. It is an Earth, where Giant Orc, I think, is a Dark, so you might want to play that if you're going for like Dark Synergies and things. But I think this card is very interesting to see here. Next up, we got Indomitable Fighter Lele. This is a level 4 Beast Warrior, 2300 attack, 0 defense. If this card attacks, it is changed to defense position at the end of the battle phase. The card's battle position cannot be changed until the end of your next turn except by the card effect. So this is just Goblin Attack Force, realistically. But this card has a Union monster that makes it slightly different, and that is Protector's Soul Aelin. Now, this is a level 1 Fairy Union monster, 0 attack, 0 defense. It says once per turn, you can equip this card to an Indomitable Fighter Lele you control, or unequip it to special summon this card in face-up attack position. When equipped to a monster by this card's effect, you can change that monster's battle position 1 per turn. And that can only... the monster can only be equipable one Union monster at a time. That's a standard caveat that a lot of these Union monsters have. So this turns Indomitable Fighter Lele into potentially a better Goblin Attack Force. However, I really do think that Goblin Attack Force is generally better. It's a level 4 Warrior, so you can stretch it off Rhoda. And if you're playing a deck with these cards, you probably want to go for things like Final Attack Order or Skill Drain, which can just switch them to attack better than Lele can, or than Aelin can for Lele. But it is kind of interesting because Giant Orc also has a Union monster specific to it, so it seems like Konami's starting to set up these alternate options for these big beaters. That's kind of interesting. And speaking of Union monsters, there were also one other set of Union monsters in this set, namely Soitsu and Doitsu. These are very similar to a previous set of cards, Aitsu and I think Koitsu, maybe? I forget the exact wording for them, but basically one is a very, very weak normal monster. In this case, Soitsu, level 3, 0 attack, 0 defense. And it's totally unreliable, and he does wonder if he has incredible potential, though. And that potential is reached through Doitsu, the level 4 Fairy Union. 100 attack, 200 defense, says once per turn you can equip this card to a Soitsu you control, or unequip it, blah, blah, blah. When equipped to a monster by this card's effect, that monster gains 2500 attack. So basically it turns the Soitsu into a 2500 attack point monster. If you conceptualize this in terms of the resources that you're spending for this, is basically like a 1 tribute 2500 attack point monster, so it's kind of like a Summon Skull. However, it does have protection from things like battle. So that's kind of nice, but after it's destroyed by battle, or not destroyed by battle, that is, you're leveled to 0 attack point monster. So realistically, it's not the best thing in the world, but this is kind of like a Summon Skull with extra steps. I mean, you can use Frontline Base or things like that to cheat it out a little bit, but realistically, I don't think that it is the best thing in the world. I think if you're going for one of these silly Union monster combos, you should go for the original combo, because that can at least buff it up a lot more, and it's a lot more impressive if you pull it off, I think. But speaking of monsters that need another monster to make them even somewhat playable, we got Giant Kozaki. Giant Kozaki is a level 4 Dark Monster Fiend, 2500 attack, 2500 defense. It says if there is no face-up Kozaki on the field, destroy this card. If this face-up card is destroyed, inflict damage equal to the original attack of this card to its current controller. Now, you could use this in something like a Skill Drain build, bring this thing out. 2500 attack on a level 4 monster is quite good. However, you potentially get punished hard if they ever clear the Skill Drain, and you take 2500 points of damage. So I think honestly the best way to play this card is potentially in a Xian Spy burn deck. So Xian Spy is a normal spell. It says target one face of monster you control, give control of it to your opponent until the end phase of this turn. So let's say you start with a Kozaki on your side of the field. You summon a giant Kozaki, give it to your opponent with the Xian Spy. You potentially tribute off that Kozaki for something else, like maybe an order to charge or order to smash, etc. Something that can take advantage of that normal monster and get rid of it. And then your opponent takes 2,500 points of damage. Very convoluted combo, I know. And realistically, both versions of playing Giant Kozaki are pretty bad. I mean, the Skill Drain version actually might be better. It probably is better. But I do think it's kind of interesting to explore the different ways that burn can manifest in this format. Xian Spy also opens up Amoeba plays or Griggle plays, which are both monsters that give you a benefit when they're switched to your opponent. So that's kind of neat. But if we're talking about other burn cards in this set, there are much better ones to go with. Ebon Magician Kern is a potential one. It's a level 2 spellcaster, 1200 attack, 0 defense. So during your standby phase, inflict 300 damage to your opponent for each monster they control. So if you're playing something like a Panda Burn deck and you give them a bunch of Geometry tokens, then you could potentially just sit on this, dealing 900 damage a turn, which isn't terrible. However, it's probably not the best thing in the world, especially if you are going for a Panda Burn deck, which wants to attack over the tokens with like Yakigiri Panda and go for big explosive plays like that. So realistically, this card is not that good. But if we're talking about other burn cards in this set, there are some very, very good inclusions to the deck. Firstly, being Dimension Wall. This is a trap card that says activate only when an opponent's monster declares an attack. Instead of you, your opponent takes the battle damage you would have taken from that battle. So this can really punish your opponent for making really aggressive plays and deal a ton of damage to them. And so this card is very, very good in burn decks. Now, if we're talking about other burn cards here, there is a card that's a bit more of a build around, but if you can build around it, it's very powerful, and that is Magical Explosion. This is a normal trap. It says activate only while you have no cards in your hand. Inflict 200 damage to your opponent for each spell card in your graveyard. Now, this could potentially form an FTK deck. You know, the library FTK is still running around in GOAT format after all. And since they share a ban list between GOAT and Cyber, you could potentially build a library FTK based around Magical Explosion, you know, trying to get a bunch of spells activated and engraved, and then setting a bunch of Magical Explosions to blow at your opponent there. If you set 2 Magical Explosions and you have 20 spells engraved, that is exact lethal there. So kind of an interesting FTK to go for. I think that the typical library FTK is a little bit better because Black Pendant is a spell that you can activate to fuel your libraries. So I think it's a little bit better in that regard. But just having another option to go for there is kind of interesting. Of course, a lot of people don't like another option for FTKs in the format, but I do think the Magical Explosion is a bit harder to pull off than you might expect. So I don't think it'll break the format by any means, but for the people who do like to cook with FTKs, there is this now in the format. And lastly, for burn, we've got Fire Darts here. This is a normal trap. It says activate only while you have no cards in your hand. Roll a 6-sided die 3 times and inflict damage to your opponent equal to the sum of the die rolls times 100. This is really bad. I mean, at max, it's dealing 1,800 points of damage, but at minimum, it's dealing 300 points of damage. And so it's just not very good. You can probably guarantee more damage through either Secret Battle or Just Search. So realistically, there's no real reason to play this card. And I did say that's the last of the burn cards here, but there are actually one more, and that is Spiritual Fire Art Kurenai. This is a normal trap that says tribute 1 fire monster, inflict damage to your opponent equal to that monster's original attack. Now, why I didn't feature this when I was discussing about the burn cards originally is because it actually is part of a sequence of traps that aren't necessarily burn traps, and that's the Spiritual Arts. Each of them are based around one element. So we've got Earth in Kurogane, we've got Wind in Miyabi, and we got Water in Aoi. And they're also all based around the Spirit Charmers. So cool to see them playing around more with those Spirit Charmers, featuring them in more things. But I already talked about Kurenai. It deals fire damage. Earth Art lets you summon out an Earth monster from your graveyard by tributing 1 Earth monster. And it doesn't have to be a level 4 lower Earth monster, but you can play this potentially with like Goblin Attack Force and things like that. But it is a very interesting card to just get more aggressive and get more tempo potentially. We've also got Spiritual Wind Art Miyabi. This card is actually a card that I would probably be tinkering with a bit because I've played Reaper Form a bit, and there is a deck you can build around this card basically that is basically just a wind deck that plays this card, tributes a wind, and spins back an opponent's card to the bottom of the deck. This can insulate like Stein plays and things like that, and it can also trigger Last Will to bring out a Stein as well. So a lot of cool things you can do with this card here. But lastly, for the Spiritual Arts, we've got Miyabi, or not Miyabi, Aoi. And this is another card you can sort of build around. This says tribute 1 water monster, look at your opponent's hand, then send 1 card from their hand in the graveyard. So basically confiscation at the price of tributing 1 water monster. And that's a pretty good price to pay, honestly. So very cool card here. And I think, honestly, these Spiritual Arts are a lot of fun to like sort of experiment with. I think that Miyabi and Aoi have the most potential here, but I could definitely see a more aggressive Fire Burn deck potentially playing Kurenai, or I could see like an Earth deck that's just trying to build tempo with this. So very cool stuff here for sure, though. And speaking of water monsters, there are some water monsters to pair with Owie in this set. One being Poison Draw Frog. This is a level 2 water monster, Aqua. 100 attack, 100 defense. Says when this face-up card on the field is sent to the graveyard, unless it was attacked while face down and destroyed by battle, you can draw one card. So you might think, oh, that's perfect. I tribute it off for Owie, and then I draw a card. I rip a card out of my opponent's hand. That's great. However, this will miss timing if you use it for Owie, because it's a when you can effect. So the last thing that happens has to be it being sent to graveyard. And the last thing that happens if you use it to pay the cost for Owie is that your opponent has a card ripped out of hand. So you can't use Poison Draw Frog for the Owie, which is quite unfortunate. Honestly, there aren't many uses to this card in this format. It just misses timing way too much. But it's still interesting, and we'll see play later on in different iterations of Frog decks. Next up, we got Tadpole. Tadpole is a level 1 water Aqua. 0 attack, 0 defense. Says when this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can add any number of Tadpoles from your deck to your hand. So this is sort of building up card advantage, I guess. You know, you add a bunch of Tadpoles, so that's kind of nice. And you can pitch those for Raigeki Break or Tribe Infecting Virus, etc. So, you know, it's cool just getting that deck thinning. It's kind of like a water version of Thunder Dragon. So that's kind of neat. But the key card that really plays around with Tadpole is Death Frog here. Death Frog is a level 5 Aqua 19 attack monster. It says when this card tribute summon, you can special summon Death Frogs from your hand or deck up to the number of Tadpoles in your graveyard. And you might wonder why you'd want just a bunch of mediocre 19 attack point monsters on your side of the field. That doesn't seem that good. Well, the reason why you'd want that is because of Death Croaking. This is a normal spell that says activate only while you control 3 face-up Death Frog. Destroy all cards your opponent controls. So if you do manage to pull off the Death Frog tribute summon while you've got like 2 Tadpoles in grave, then you can potentially get out 3 Death Frogs and go for the Death Croaking. However, there are potential other ways to do this as well. For instance, if you've just got the 1 Tadpole in grave and you bring out a Death Frog, and you just bring out 1 Death Frog from deck, then you can potentially use a Rival Appears to bring out the other, if your opponent has like a Cyber Dragon especially. Because Rival Appears is a normal trap that says, select 1 face-up monster your opponent controls, special summon 1 monster from your hand that has the same level as the selected monster. So you could potentially go for plays like that. However, that's a little bit of a stretch. I really just mentioned that because I'm trying to fit in these last 4 cards that are in the set here in a meaningful way or a logical way, but there really wasn't a way that I could find to connect them to the other cards in the set here. So I'm just going to go through them rapid fire at this point. First up, we've got another normal trap, Conscription. This is a normal trap that says activate the top card of your opponent's deck, and if it is a monster that can be normal summoned or set, special summon it to your field. Otherwise, add that card to your opponent's hand. So this has the potential of going really minus for you if the monster can't be normal summoned or set, or if it's a spell or trap. Then your opponent gets a free card, basically. And even if it is a good card, that, or not necessarily a good card, but a card that can be summoned off Conscription here, then it might not even be a card that you can really use. It could be something like Batteryman C, which is a level 2 Thunder, 0 attack, 0 defense. Says if all Batteryman C's you control are in attack position, all machine type monsters you control gain 500 attack for each Batteryman C you control. If all Batteryman C's you control are in defense position, all machine type monsters you control gain 500 defense for each Batteryman C you control. So this card is really bad. Yeah, this is just really bad. Yeah, I mean, it's another card for Charger, I guess, Batteryman Charger. But realistically, this card is not good enough to see play. And it's Thunder, so it doesn't even buff itself. Now, the last cards here, I do want to mention, I don't normally mention normal monsters in these sets, but these monsters are important to note because they are level 3 monsters with a fair amount of attack. The first one is Jerry Beansman, which is an iconic card, level 3, 1750 attack, 0 defense. And it says, Jerry, a Bean Soldier, believes he's the strongest warrior in the world, but his true abilities are still untested. Now, he is the strongest soldier in our hearts. But I really hope they eventually release a Jerry Beansman retrain, so that way we can see what his true abilities really are. But as is, you know, being a level 3 monster with the highest attack in this format, it's still pretty good at this point. And Mad Lobster is a level 3, 1700 attack point monster that also has a pretty high amount of attack. You know, Sonic Duck has already been released to have 1700 attack, so it ties with this. But if you are going in for like a big, like normal monster based deck, potentially playing things like Emissary of the Afterlife to add these to your hand and playing like Order to Charge or Order to Smash to take advantage of them, then these are good to know about. So very, very neat stuff here, and a cool way to end the video because that is all the new cards added to Cyber format. Now, most of the powerful decks in the format are not really going to be based entirely around these cards, but I do like that there are a variety of cool tools in this set for decks to play around with now. Of course, you know, beyond those cool tools, there's also the sort of Steino TK where you can easily bring out like a Cyber Twin or a Cyber End Dragon. You can also just go hard machines and just play a bunch of limiter removals to try and get that option as well. So there are a variety of ways to just OTK in this format, and does make it much, much more aggressive than GOAT. But I am excited to see what people do with some of the more interesting techs in the format. and hopefully we see a lot of cool decks. I'm planning on being in Cyber format for slightly longer than GOAT. I'm not sure how long I'm going to stay here because, you know, again, Cyberstein OTK might just be the only thing really worth playing in this format. I don't believe that to be the case right now, but it could definitely be an outcome. And I'm going to be exploring a bunch of different ways to play the Cyberstein OTK. So we'll be seeing exactly how many of those there are and how many other decks can actually compete against that. But I do think this is a very interesting set and a very important set in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. And I think a set that people might overhype looking back on it, but like looking back on some of the powerful cards released here, I mean, Miracle Fusion, Magical Explosion, Cyber Dragon, and its fusions, like there are some powerful things in this set. And I think of the early GX era, it might be sort of the most powerful of those sets, which is kind of sad, but I mean, you'll definitely see what I mean when we get into later sets as well. Because unfortunately, like most of the GX early sets are just filled with pack filler. But I do think that even in that pack filler, there can be interesting strategies to explore. So I look forward to exploring them with all of you. If you enjoy this sort of video and want to see my exploration of Cyber format, then definitely subscribe to the channel. It really does help out a lot. And we actually hit our goal of reaching 1,300 subscribers in April. So I'd really like to reach 1,400 or even 1,500 in May. And so if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more, definitely help us along the way to that goal. Also, if you want to support me directly, I do have a Patreon, and if you sign up for the Patreon, you'll be shouted out in these videos. So big shoutouts to Tyler Compton, GMYFS, Rinswin, Dumptruck, Porktruck, Coon, and Brundonker. It really does mean a lot to me that you support me in this way and encourage me to make more videos like this. Let me know what you think of the cards in this set and this format as a whole down in the comments below. Leave a like if you liked the video, and until next time, I've been Ben from YG from Zero, and I'm signing off.